Living in the suburbs has always made me feel a little uneasy. The uncanny copy pasting of houses, as if they arrive as a prefab on the back of a truck, stuck down, every house a clone of those adjacent. When you live in a neighborhood like mine, you start to feel like the people living inside those houses are from the same factory, too. Reality is all too often tamed by an engineer's blueprint. One morning, while sipping my coffee and taking in the silence, it occurred to me. Something that felt so particularly strange about the area. It was so simple. Something so recognizable that I have to question why I never noticed it sooner. The emptiness that swallowed the space. The lack of shade. The answer hiding in plain sight. Almost asking to be acknowledged. There were no trees. It's not uncommon for greenery to be sparse in areas like this. Everything is built so fast these days, there's no time for nature to get in the way. But you'll see trees towering along the side of the road, blocking the hum of traffic driving by. You'll still find shrubbery, large or small, defining a border between homes. Flora, tucked between the man-made concrete, exists not because someone has made it so, but because nature implored. Where was that? I glanced out the window, hoping to be proven wrong. Surely, I thought, surely there must be something, somewhere, having escaped my mind. The lack of earth stared back at me. Gray concrete, wooden fences, white painted houses, each the same blueprint. The pristine of each yard only looked so because it was fake. Grass made of plastic, made not in soil, but in a factory. The sun shone down, but it felt wasted here, like a beautiful frame with no portrait inside. Had it always been this way? Was there a time when the yards were full of natural shelter? Had the sunrise been accompanied by the sounds of birds singing? Could you catch a glimpse of squirrels scattering up the bark, narrowly avoiding running straight into the bottom side of a birdhouse? I heard the stairs creaking as my husband came downstairs, an hour later than myself, as usual. "Good morning, babe." I almost didn't reply, finding myself lost in curiosity. "Honey," I spoke whilst staring out the window, "where's the nearest tree?" Silence, followed by a slight laughter. The nearest tree? Yes. I turned to face him. There isn't a single tree on this street, and I can't even remember the last time I saw one without leaving town. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He closed his lips together, pouting slightly as he thought. I'm not sure. That's very strange. His concern turned to me. Babe, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I had. The phantom remains of nature was present all around us. All the trees chopped down to make our fences being the most basic example. But I didn't want to seem insane, so I dropped it. Yeah, just found it odd. It plagued my mind all day. I can't place my finger on why it affected me so deeply. Perhaps it was the fact that it remained unspoken. Why had nobody else ever noticed? Or, at the very least, never mentioned this oddity? Was I simply turning this into a larger issue than it actually was? My questions wanted answers. And I could see one of my neighbors, Edith, walking down the pavement. Edith is a lovely lady. She's lived alone since her partner passed away. But that was before I ever lived here. She speaks a lot about Mike. I wish I could have met him. He sounds like a great man. She has no family to look after her. But despite her age, she gets on perfectly fine living alone. She's strong. And she's often inspired me to be stronger. I opened the front door, acting as though I was just leaving the house, and spotted her. Edith! I smiled as I walked over to her.
Oh, how lovely to see you, dear.
Her voice always warms me to hear. Being alone most of the day, she always appreciates a long social interaction. We spoke for a while, catching up with one another. She said that she didn't want to waste the beautiful weather, and that Mike would always take advantage of it. She never exactly got any closure with him. His cause of death was never discovered. He was found in the bushes a few towns over, covered in his own blood. Despite no visible wounds. I've never pried deeper. I only talk about it when she brings up the topic. As things felt like they were wrapping up, I changed the subject. Edith, have you ever noticed? I felt nervous to mention it, but I wasn't sure why. Have you ever noticed that there aren't any trees around. I gestured at the houses as I looked around, as if it were even possible to point directly at a lack of something. Glancing back at Edith, her head was tilted slightly as she stared back at me.
Come again, dear? No trees? What do you mean?
I felt a little silly, almost wondering if I had missed some, somehow blind to them. There aren't any trees, are there? I questioned even myself. She stared at me, not responding. At first, I thought she was having the same realization as myself. But the silence grew longer. Uncomfortably long. There are no trees. I began to clarify my point again. Anything to fill the empty air. Her face seemed to drop. She looked directly into my eyes as her irises dilated. She held that eye contact for just a moment before she frantically started to look around.
Where are the trees?
She mumbled between quick flicks of her head. Hey, Edith, look at me. I held her arm to support her as she stumbled. I almost wish she hadn't looked at me again. The stillness in her eyes as her lips trembled. It haunts me. Her skin had gone pale, and she began to buckle at the knees.
Where did they go?
She cried, screaming now.
Where did they all go?
Her head tilted up slightly, as if trying to catch a glimpse of the towering trees that simply were not there. Only clear skies. Other neighbors on the street started to peek out their windows or doors. Some rushed out to help her. One held her under the arms, slowly lowering her to the curb, allowing her to sit. Another knelt down beside her. Edith, are you okay? He asked her.
Trees. No trees.
These were the only words I could make out between incoherent messes. The man looked at me. What did you say to her? A fit of anger in his voice. Why would he immediately blame me? I don't know. I couldn't find the words. I spoke about how few trees there are, and she started panicking. I felt terrible. I didn't mean for this to happen. This onset of fear I had given her. The two men stood her up, walking her to her house. I tried to follow, but one held his hand up to me with the palm open. I think you should leave. I would have fought my case. I was concerned for her and wanted to help. but I felt like I had little to stand on, given that I was the cause of her state. I returned home and told my husband about what had just happened. He was just as puzzled as myself. That night, I struggled to sleep. The only thoughts on my mind were about Edith. And still, the lack of trees. Given the silence outside, it was like a knife cutting cleanly through the air when the silence changed into something else. Wind? No. A mumbling? Maybe? What was it? I stood up and looked out the window. I couldn't see any source of the noise. Opening the window quietly, it was louder now. Still quiet, but loud enough that I could have a sense of its direction. Directly below, leaning out the window slightly, I could see them. A person stood outside our front door, speaking. The volume was low enough to keep the voice ambiguous. Just a steady flow of mumbling sounds, with vague words that could just be made out. Branch. And unseen. The same sentence, whatever it was, being repeated like a broken record player. I listened very carefully, urging myself to find the meaning. Finally, I could make it out. The unseen branch blesses this place. The unseen branch blesses this place. My husband woke up. I heard the sheets moving a little behind me. What's that noise? His words croaked through his tired, half-asleep state. I glanced at him, opening my mouth to answer, before noticing the chanting had stopped. Looking back, I could see the figure running away. They seemed to disappear, their inky black clothes making it easy to quickly lose them to the night. In the morning, I found myself just staring out the window. The lack of sleep, haunting terror from Edith, and the oddity encountered in the night, all combined into a horrid sense of impending doom. My husband tried to comfort me, but his explanations fell onto ears too curious to accept his solutions. It was probably some idiot teen. Edith is old. Things like that happen sometimes. I'm sure there are trees somewhere in town. His intentions were good. He meant well. He just couldn't see the bigger picture. All of this had to fit together. I knew it. I couldn't see the bigger picture either, but I could see the jigsaw making it up. I just had to put it together. Towards midday, I left the house and made my way 2 doors down to Edith's home. I wanted to apologize for the previous day. The walk felt the longest it ever had. Every step, I felt like eyes were on me. The fear gripped tight at my chest. I was acutely aware of the unnatural environment. Still, somewhere that had once felt like home now felt like a fake augmentation of reality. I considered turning back, but I knew this would only consume me further. Perhaps I should have just gone home. Perhaps ignorance is bliss. Approaching Edith's door, I stood for a moment, considering whether to knock. Even as I lifted a hand up, fist closed, I still paused. Eventually, after a deep breath, I tapped 3 times. Then 3 more. Then 3 more. Each wave of knocks had a few minutes between, yet no answer. Edith is always home at this time, having her lunch. I knew this wasn't right. Had I been in a better state of mind, I probably wouldn't have thought too much of it. But this was too much at once. Testing my luck, I pulled the handle down. The door was unlocked. Walked with surprisingly less apprehension than the knocking had taken. I opened the door and stepped inside. Edith? I called out as I walked down her short hallway. I had never actually been inside her home. Most of the walls were covered in photos. An entire life, all displayed upon these walls. In many of the younger photos, she's with a man. I assumed this to be Mike. Walking into her kitchen, I see her fridge door wide open. The light spills to the floor as the gentle hum fills the room. On the counter lay an envelope with my name written in pen. I would never open somebody else's mail, but this was addressed to me. It's my own mail. I also thought that perhaps Edith may have written something that could help me find her. The envelope wasn't sealed. I could see the paper poking out with something printed onto it. I carefully took it out, my eyes taking a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. Edith, clearly recognizable, her clothes soaked in blood. She lay in a bush, thinly cramped between the foliage and prickly twigs. The leaves seemed to surround her, as though the bush itself hadn't been disturbed. like putting an object into a box without ever opening it. My heart rate picked up, almost beating through my chest. My trembling hands couldn't hold the paper steady. Feeling tears forming in my eyes, I wiped them away so that I could make out the sentence written underneath. Don't break the branch that feeds you.